Hello and welcome back, and that is right, just as the title card said, today we want to go through how to install TrueNAS Core on a QNAP NAS system. Now, this video has been a long time coming. This has been a subject you guys have been requesting for a while. We've only really been covering TrueNAS in 2022 here on the channel. We kind of danced around it the last couple of years, but now we've really got our teeth into it with TrueNAS Core and Scale and other places like Unraid and stuff like that. I thought now is the time to have this conversation. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be going through all of the steps, right the way from having the bare bones kit in front of us to having TrueNAS up and running on a QNAP NAS system. But I think it would be remiss not to highlight a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, what is the deal with the layout of my office? Well, right now I'm conducting two very large-scale tests for another video just out of shot. I would rotate the camera, but I'd lose the light angles. But consequently, you can hear at least two of those systems, if I'm very quiet, in the background. So I've had to try my best to kind of sound dampen over there because they are RAID 6 and RAID 50 builds that are happening over there, and I can't power them down, unfortunately. So again, in the concept of time frame and stuff like that, I've had to record it now and do my best to dampen that noise. The second thing, and way more important than sound levels, is simply a disclaimer about installing TrueNAS on a QNAP. Now, when you buy a QNAP NAS, it arrives with its own software on board, QTS or QUTS if you've got some of the large scale stuff there, ZFS alternative there. It is a great platform. There are lots of applications on there, lots of first and third party applications too. And indeed, when you buy a QNAP NAS, one of the reasons a lot of people buy turnkey solutions is because of the ease of setting it up and having everything ready straight off the bat. When you buy a QNAP, you are paying for both the hardware and the software. So you are buying a system that's got the software included there. So before you go and install TrueNAS on one of these, take the time to experiment with QTS. Have a look at it because it is a fully featured platform and arguably is more feature-led and more user-friendly than TrueNAS. Don't just immediately make the jump. This is a video for people that have got a QNAP NAS or have utilised QTS on a QNAP NAS and decided they would like to try out TrueNAS. Now, TrueNAS Core. Now, another thing I will highlight while we're talking about this is everything I'm going to show you today is reversible. You're not stuck with it right now. If you do want to migrate to TrueNAS Core, you do have the option of reversing it back. But if you use the same storage drives that are already inside your system, that are in your QNAP system with data on them, they are getting formatted. So make sure that the data that's on those drives is backed up elsewhere. You should be doing that anyway. The next thing to bear in mind is, although we're not really doing anything that I believe invalidates any warranty or support from QNAP, I have got no certainty on that. I am by no means a legal or support expert in that field. So do bear in mind, although you are installing TrueNAS Core on a piece of storage media within the system and not removing QNAP's own OS on there, that's crucially important. It's worth highlighting that there is the potential that what you're doing right now may invalidate the support and warranty on your system. So do bear that in mind. So, TrueNAS Core, we're going to get it installed on this, but we have to make sure we've got the right tools for the job, don't we? So, the first thing we're going to need, unsurprisingly, is a QNAP. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be using this. This is the TS453E. Now, I'm going for this for several reasons. Not only because it's a more recent release and therefore it's really good for the channel and SEO and all that lark, but on top of that, it's because it arrives with a quad-core Intel Celeron processor and 8 gig of memory, and it's got an HDMI output. Those are the three minimums that you should be considering here, okay? So you need to make sure you have a CPU that is at least a 64-bit x86 class processor there. That means generally an Intel Celeron, Pentium, i3, i5, i7 and above. You can use some of the AMD embedded Ryzen processors there, and there are other AMD processors out there that have got onboard Vega graphics or R6 graphics, but that second part is important there because you're going to need, at least during the setup, access to the visual output. Now, when it comes to memory on this system, you can get away with less than 8 gig of memory. You can even run it on as little as 4 gig, but you will not get a very smooth experience in the ZFS platform that is TrueNAS Core. So it's highly recommended that you have at least 8 gig of memory but also the option to scale up. If you want to take advantage of the full range of applications and services within TrueNAS Core, then you're going to need at least 16 gig for things like inline data deduplication. Now, when I mention about the visual out, of course, I'm talking about an HDMI port, the USB ports as well, but all QNAPs have got USB ports. You need the HDMI output to be able to configure the application. When you're setting it up for the first time, you can't do the whole thing, at least easily, over the network. You need to be able to attach a KVM, keyboard video mouse type setup, with the QNAP in order to create your TrueNAS Core installation there. That's why we need a QNAP that's got an HDMI out. Okay, so make sure whatever QNAP you're going to use has got that. An x86 64-bit processor, at least 8 gig of memory, and an HDMI output there. And USB is going to have it. The second thing you're going to need is this, a USB key. That's right, and again, you can pretty much get any USB. You've got carte blanche. I'm utilizing this, a SanDisk Ultra Thick. It's one that I utilized in a previous video about installing TrueNAS on a Terramaster, but you've kind of got any one you want to go for there. I went for the 32 gig model because this is knocking around for about 7 or 8 nicker. It's a decent enough speed at 130 megs, and frankly, this tiny little USB there, it's going to be very hard for that to come out of your system. It's linked in the description, obviously. The next thing that you're going to need, as mentioned, is help with that KVM setup there, keyboard video mouse. Now, you're not going to need a mouse, although you can use one. What you need is a monitor and a keyboard. Now, in my case, I'm going to be utilizing an HDMI out capture device. This is so I can do the recordings for this video, but for you, you're going to need just a standard HDMI monitor that we're plugging into the back of our system. But the other thing you're going to need, of course, is a big old USB keyboard. It really doesn't make a difference. There's no compatibility problems. Any USB keyboard will do. I do not recommend utilizing either a wireless keyboard or utilizing a Bluetooth keyboard, simply because there's no guarantee that the dongle will be powered enough to have that. So make sure it's a standard kind of PS2 class USB keyboard there. Next thing you're going to need is some storage media. Whether you're going to use the original storage media that was inside that you had previously in your QNAP that you are formatting, or getting new storage media, you're going to need at least one drive or more if you want to take advantage of RAID configurations. But that's not where it ends, because there's another reason I went for this NAS here, and this is something that really only applies to the more modern generation of QNAP NASes. I've gone for a NAS with M2 slots inside. Now, there's a reason for this. When you install TrueNAS Core or begin the installation of TrueNAS Core on the QNAP system, later on, I'm going to go through the steps, you need to choose a target. Much like your PC or Mac system or phone that you're watching this on, TrueNAS Core installs like an operating system and it needs a target drive for it to live on. Now, what that means is, whichever drive you point TrueNAS Core at, you're not going to be able to use it for storage. Now, you could slam in a USB device into the back and install TrueNAS Core on another USB. I do not recommend that. 1, you get poor performance. 2, disconnections, accidental disconnections and more. But these newer devices from QNAP have got M2 NVMe slots, and you can pick up very small, 60, 120 gig M2 NVMe's these days for a pittance. Getting one of these and installing it inside there will allow you to install TrueNAS on a super fast NVMe and allow you to keep all of those storage bays for your data sets, your volumes, pools, whatever. And that's really it. That is everything you need. With that last one being an option for you, you can choose any kind of storage media that best suits you. I just recommend using the M2s because then it keeps TrueNAS, the software, running lovely and fast there internally. But what we're going to do now is make our way over to the desktop PC that I've got lined up outside in the other room. And when I do that, I'm going to show you the software and where to get the ISO files to begin your TrueNAS Core installation. And then we're going to make our way back here, get the device set up for the first time, and then I'm going to walk you through the entire TrueNAS Core installation. Let's make our way to the screen. Okay, so we've made our way onto the desktop of my PC there. Again, I'm using OBS, so hopefully there won't be any interruptions during this recording here. But what I will also add during this is that as I'm doing this, you will see the occasional black screen as Windows asks for admin user rights to do certain things. So if you see a black screen flash, That's why that is. But the first thing you need to do is head over to TrueNAS.com/download TrueNAS Core. Don't worry, it's all linked in the description, and hopefully, again, fingers crossed, I will have the written walkthrough and complete guide to this linked in the description at NAS Compares as well, which will have links to all of the resources used in today's video. So what you need to do on the TrueNAS Core website here is scroll down, and you can either sign up to TrueNAS Core and get all the newsletters and the updates and stuff like that, or if you would rather just go ahead, you can just click no thank you, I've already signed up, and then from there you can download the latest stable release of TrueNAS Core. Now bear in mind you can download the legacy older versions, and there are some beta versions released from time to time. Regardless of the you know, whether there are beta available or not, for your initial installation, I would still recommend going for a standard stable release of TrueNAS Core right now, just because you're already going to be using a slightly unconventional setup with a turnkey NAS. Why throw any more cement into the mixer? But I will also add, when you download this, it's going to download it as an ISO, a kind of digital representation of an optical disc, much like the old Windows discs that we used to install in PCs. Now, that is no good to us, is it? Because there ain't no CD drive in this NAS. What we need to do is convert that into our USB bootable, hence why we needed the USB key. So the next thing we need to do after you've clicked download, I've already done that, is to download this tool, Rufus, R-U-F-U-S. This is a tool that converts ISOs, or digital images of disks, into USB bootables. It's completely free, and although there are multiple versions that you can download, I recommend downloading version 3.20 portable, because you're not going to use it loads, and you only need to really use it the once here, where you can double click, open it up, it's got its own graphical user interface, and we can start creating our TrueNAS Core installation USB. So the last thing we might need, depending on your USB, is formatting it to FAT32. Now, in most cases, you're not going to need to do this. It does. It's a much easier installation and smoother installation if the USB that you're using is FAT32 formatted. And if you're using a larger than 32 gigabyte USB, that can be problematic because Windows by default does not format standard USB drives larger than 32 gigabytes to FAT32 easily. But if you want to format it, and again, this is an optional thing to do, download this tool available, and this will be linked in the description, that allows you to format larger than 32 gigabyte files there. But what we'll do now is we'll attach my USB key. I've connected it there. You've just heard the little blingity blongity there in the background. And we can also head over to those files that I've downloaded earlier. Now, at the moment, you can see the USB is visible, but it has no storage element there. What you see there is an empty drive. Now, there's two ways you can go about formatting that. You can right-click, click Format if you choose, and you have the option of FAT32. But as you can see, the capacity there is null and void. It's 32 kilobytes. It's nothing. And that's because there's a partition on that drive. And again, what I'm showing you now is not essential. Realistically, you may never need to do this. Let's bring that back up there. Because a lot of the time when you run Rufus for the first time, it will see the drive regardless and overwrite any formatting. But that's not always the case, depending on the format and the OS that you are running. So either use that FAT32 tool that I mentioned, or alternatively, head into the bottom on a Windows PC and type the word disk part, one word. Open that up. You may see a black screen there. And when you open up disk part, in the command line, type in the word list disk. Two words, one space in the middle, and it lists all of the visible drives on there. Now be a bit careful here because you can make a big old mistake. You can see 3 disks listed there. That's my OS, that's my scratch disk, and finally there's that 28 gig. That's that USB there. So what I want to do is select disk 2, as we can see there on screen. We've selected the USB, and then we type the word clean. Type enter, and now that's formatted that USB. It's removed the partition that was clearly already on that drive that was going to be a problem. Remember, you may not need to do any of this, but I include it just in case. If we head back into that list of drives and this time right click and format, you'll see that now we'll see the full 32 gig capacity, or at least unknown, and we have the option of a FAT32 format. But again, I still recommend using the FAT32 formatting tool there. Right, So if we head over to those apps that we downloaded earlier on, we can see there is TrueNAS Core, an ISO. You can ignore the one for scale, that's for another video. There is Rufus that we downloaded as well. And finally, there's that GUI format tool, which I'm not going to show you how to use. It's really straightforward, and you probably don't even need it. So the first thing we need to do is open up the Rufus application. Again, you may have seen the blank screen there. When it opens up, you should see your USB drive listed at the top, as I can see there. Again, depending on your USB, if it doesn't appear there, use some of the tools that I've just talked about to format the drive. After that, go down to here and then click the button for select. Then go through your system and find the TrueNAS ISO that you downloaded earlier. In my case, TrueNAS 13. Then click open. It's letting you know that it's an ISO hybrid, but at the same time, you're going to have to do forced copy operations. Don't worry, you're not going to have to worry about any of this because you are using a format tool here. So now we have got the USB ready, we've got the ISO ready, and what we need to do now is mash them together and make ourselves a bootable USB. Click start. It will warn you that the data will be completely erased. Again, unsurprising, but we've already formatted it, so it doesn't matter. And then click OK. This will now turn that USB into our TrueNAS Core installation media. This is the little drive we're going to use instead of an optical drive, which we are now going to, when it's done, safely remove and connect to our QNAP there. And then from there, we'll start connecting all of our peripherals and booting the device up for the first time. Installation will not take long. It's only about 1 GB in size at the ISO, and as you can see, it's now finished. So the ISO is complete, and on the bottom right of the screen, what we need to do now is head over to the Safely Remove Hardware tool, right click and select Eject on the USB that you've connected there. Remove the USB, you'll get a notification like so, and then from there we can safely remove our USB and get ready to install it inside our QNAP. What I'm going to do now is get all the peripherals set up here on the desk and show you the next step of connecting all the bits and bobs and what you'll see during the first installation of TrueNAS Core on your QNAP. Okay, so time to start getting our hands a little bit dirty here during the installation of either TrueNAS Core or TrueNAS Scale. That's right, I'm going to use this little middle bit of the video in both installations of when I do Core and Scale. Sue me. So, right now we have got our TS453E. Again, remember you're going to need one that's got an HDMI output, and we're going to want to start connecting things. The last thing we want to connect, by the way, is the power. Now, one thing I'm not going to show you is the installation of an M2 NVMe SSD. The reason being that different QNAP NASs have the ports for these in very different places. In the case, for example, of the TS464, I'm looking off camera because that's actually in use right now, unfortunately, you can connect that inside the bays. There's a little slot there. In the case of this NAS, you have to take the chassis apart and connect it inside. So ultimately, if you are going to install TrueNAS Core on an M2 NVMe, then you're going to have to make sure to check out the hardware guide from QNAP depending on where that is. I've already installed it inside here. This isn't the drive I'm going to be using. I've already put one inside. But for you, if you are going to use an M2 NVMe, make sure you've installed that first before you've done anything else at all. Next thing, make sure you get your storage media connected. Again, in my case, I'm going to be utilising a couple of 4TB drives here. And these 4TB drives, again, if there is any data on these, it's going to get formatted. Okay, now you could use an existing data set. I've not tried to migrate over an existing paired a couple of drives in TrueNAS from an existing TrueNAS server. TrueNAS is supposed to be considerably easier to migrate data sets from one system to another, big volume pools. And again, I've not tried that on the QNAP. And remember, you're going to be installing the OS on another drive, not on the drive you're installing inside. So maybe it is migratable, but because I've not tried it personally, I'm slightly reluctant to recommend that here. But again, make sure you've got at least a couple of drives so you've got that redundancy option there and have those drives installed. And again, I know I keep saying it and I know I'm being repetitious, but you will lose the data on these drives from a QNAP installation if you try this. So make sure that data is backed up. And again, we're coming fast to a point where we're going to start the installation and there's a lot of work to roll back to QTS5 if you wish. So next up, we've got our USB. Now, as mentioned, I recommend using a USB 3 port on this system. Personally, I've tried this on this very system here on the front port, but again, which one you use is up to you, but I do recommend using at least a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port on there. And then finally, we want to install our KV-NOT-M setup there. So we've got my keyboard, which we're going to install there. Have that ready. And again, almost certainly you've got a QNAP with at least one USB 2 port, so you might as well use one of those and have that connected there. Have your keyboard ready, and then you need your monitor. Again, as mentioned, I'm not using a monitor, I'm using a capture card here, but just make sure you've got a monitor that you're utilizing. Connect it into the QNAP first. If it has got more than one HDMI port, make sure you go for the HDMI 1, because the HDMI ports on some of these NASs like this one that have two HDMI ports, they mirror one another, but during initial boot, only HDMI 1 will do an output, at least in BIOS anyway, so make sure you've got that connected there. And again, in your case, you're going to connect this to a monitor, but in my case, I'm connecting this into my laptop for the capture that we're going to do there. And that's it. I've now got the device set up. I've got my USB. In there. I've got my M2 SSD. I've got my KV set up there. I'm ready to go, pretty much all over. What I need to do now is connect power and the LAN. Now, connect the LAN first, although you're not going to need the LAN till much later in the installation for the network access. The power is the thing you're going to need to be concerned with installing it, because a lot of QNAPs at the moment have auto power on because of if there's power failure, and they like to do a recovery system. So once you attach the power, there's every possibility the system's going to begin booting immediately. Now, that in itself isn't a problem, but when we are patching into a QNAP via an HDMI output and a keyboard, what we're looking for is the initial boot of the USB. That's what we want to see. We want to see the initial boot, in my case USB, in your case HDMI, of the motherboard. And when that's going in there, we want to press either F12 or delete to go into the BIOS. And then from there, we'll be able to make sure we select our USB. So if you attach the power to your QNAP and you're not ready at the keyboard, just hold the power button down and let the device power down. So in this case, I'm going to connect it. And in my case, I've heard a couple of noises, and the system is now booting, and I don't want it to do that yet. So I'm going to power it down. You may not need to do this if you're already set up for it, but in my case, I don't want this system to boot up yet. I want to be ready so I can get ready to capture it on that BIOS there. And that's it. We've got the system ready. We've got our keyboard ready. What we want to do now is get ready at our screen, press the power and get ready to go into BIOS, which I'm now going to show you on this screen. So 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so we've got our NAS booting and we're looking at the HDMI output. Now, get ready to start spamming the delete or F12 button. It will depend on the motherboard. Everyone that's ever tried to boot Windows into BIOS will be very familiar with this. And what we're looking for is the logo for our QNAP motherboard there. You'll hear the beep. You'll see that little line there. And what we need to do is go into the motherboard like that. And there you go, we've now booted into the system there. Now, from here, again, depending on the QNAP NAS that you're using, what you will see here will differ. By the way, I apologise if you can hear my laptop fans there. But what we want to do is make our way over to the option that says boot. And this is where our boot priorities are. Now, normally the QNAP boots from the QNAP OS eMMC, a little flash DOM there at 5 GB that has QTS on board. But what we want to do is boot from that USB. Now, we've got two options. One, we can change the boot order so it boots directly from that USB if we choose to next time we boot the system. But we don't want to keep doing this. We only want to do this one time. Now, moving forward, what's going to happen is the system, when it boots, it will try to boot into different versions of the OS that are available. So what we need to do now is head into the save and exit option, scroll down to the bottom, and we want to boot from that USB drive there. Now, when you've selected that USB, you'll be prompted by the TrueNAS installer, which is going to have a countdown on there. Now, you can let it count down, or at any time just tap enter and it will go into the TrueNAS Core installer. You may also hear your fans on your system ramp up, as you can hear in the background, as it's going through the initial boot, and it doesn't really have a recommended fan speed or anything like that going on in the background. So what we're going to do right now is go into the install upgrade. You can use up and down and then press enter to select the option you want. And then from there, it will ask you to select which drive you want to utilize for your TrueNAS Core installation there. Now, in my case, I'm going to be utilizing that M2 NVMe that I've installed inside. But depending on the drive that you're going to go for and your destination, you'll need to select the appropriate drive. When you've selected your drive, tap space to put a little star in that box and then tap enter. After you've done that, it will ask you, or it will remind you that your drive will be completely formatted when the OS of TrueNAS Core is installed. But do bear in mind, once again, you shouldn't use a USB drive as it states there on screen. If you're comfortable with that, tap enter. From there, you need to create your password. And again, this password is what you're going to be utilizing along with the username root, R-O-O-T, lowercase, in order to interact with your TrueNAS for the first time. You can change this later on, but for now, it's heavily recommended that you go for a good, strong password there. I'm going for something a bit throwaway because I'm going to format this system soon afterwards. But for now, click OK. From there, it will ask you if you want to boot from UEFI or BIOS. I recommend you go for UEFI because most QNAPs use quite modern motherboards. And from there, it will ask you if you want to create a swap disk. In this situation, you're not going to be needing that at all. So I strongly recommend selecting no swap. From there, it will begin the installation of TrueNAS Core. And this is going to be installed on your SSD, or in my case, my M2 SSD, or the destination you choose. Now, depending on the destination you choose, the speed of the USB, and a little bit on the NAS itself, the speed at which this installation will take will vary. It will generally take around 5 to 25 minutes, depending on the speed of your processor and system there. I'm using quite a fast SSD there, and a relatively fast USB, so it should be quite quick. But for now, what I'm going to do is fast forward to the completion of the installation of TrueNAS Core and when the system goes back to the installation screen. Let's fast forward. Okay, so the first part of the installation is completed, and the other two packets are actually a great deal quicker to install. So you can see there on screen the installation is pretty much going all the way through to the kind of reinitialization of the bootloader there, which, you know, we are going to have to start talking soon about the next step when we go back into the BIOS there. You can see it's changing the password, disabled at the moment to FA. But again, 2FA or two-step authentication is something we can enable later on. So at the moment, it is going to reboot back into the blue splash screens page, I believe. I'm going to give it a second. If it doesn't arrive in the next 5 seconds, I'm just going to have to skip the video a little bit further. Nope. Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit. There we go. Password successfully changed for root, just like mentioned. And as you can see, we're back at the blue screen there. Now, it is important, as it says there on screen, that we need to reboot the system, but also crucially remove that USB. But that's not the only thing we need to do moving forward. So we click there, and what we want to do now is shut down this system. Now, again, we'll get into a little bit the reasoning why in just a moment. But for now, we shut down this NAS system. We wait for the system to power down, and then we remove that USB key. Because the other thing we've got to bear in mind now is when the QNAP reboots, it's still going to try to boot from the internal little flash module that's inside there that QNAP put, where they put QTS on board. So once the system, the fan has stopped spinning, which it just has, we needed to remove, let's reach for it there, remove our USB and reboot the device. And we want to go back into BIOS there. So I'll boot the device up. And again, get ready to tap F12 and or delete to go into that BIOS as soon as you hear the beep from the QNAP there. Because what you'll see now is the order of the boot sequence change, and we want to switch it over to the UEFI TrueNAS installer there that we've installation that we've selected there in order to make our way into TrueNAS. We should hear the beep in just a moment. There it is. And now we want to make our way back into the BIOS. Now, if we go back into boot, what you see now is the Seagate drive has now changed. Where there was a USB before and we've removed the USB, we can see that the UEFI custom OS is on there. So what we need to do is where it says boot option number 1, tap enter, and now we want to make sure that the Seagate Iron Wolf, in my case, where I've installed TrueNAS, but where you've installed it will differ, is boot option number 1. And that means when we reboot our QNAP now, it's going to boot from the TrueNAS installation there. Now, again, later on, if you want to reverse what we've done and you want to revert back to QTS, very important here, what you need to do is, again, go back into boot options and select QNAP OS. And by doing that, it will revert the system to read from that flash once again, and you can go ahead and reinstall QTS. Or if you've already got your original drives that have got QTS and all your data on them, if you switch it back to the boot priority from the QNAP initially, it will boot QTS just like it did before we did this. But what we want is to go back to the Seagate Iron Wolf. It's now going to deboot from that Seagate SSD that I've installed TrueNAS on, and that's going to be our first drive. And what we want to do now is save and save changes and reset, and we'll click start. And this time we don't want to start tapping any buttons. What we want the system to do now is initiate a reboot, which it should do in just a moment, and we'll hear the beep in around about 10 to 15 seconds. And at this point we don't want to start spamming those keys. We want to make sure once again our USB is not connected, and then from there what it's going to do is this time it's going to boot from that motherboard, but this time boot TrueNAS, which again takes around 3 to 5 minutes depending on the complexity of your system there. And then when it does boot into TrueNAS, there's a couple of things I'm going to show you just before we end this video, as we can see it doing right now as it's booting into our TrueNAS there. And we can boot TrueNAS by tapping start if we wish, or we can just let it carry on as it will in that 3-second countdown. Now, what you're looking at here is the boot sequence. The amount of time it's going to take to boot will differ depending on the user and the complexity of the device you're using. But what you're waiting for is for the device to appear on screen with a username, a root ID, and it will also give you an IP starting either 192 or 169. That number is the address of our TrueNAS on our local machine, and we can use that number typed into our web browser to access the TrueNAS. But there are other ways to find it, and one of the applications I always recommend is a tool called IP Scanner. IP Scanner scans your local area network across the entirety of all the placements of IPs on your network, and will find all of your devices, including that of a TrueNAS device. But otherwise, while you're still connected on HDMI here, you can get yourself your IP in order to log into your NAS. And remember, after this point, you won't need to use this keyboard and mouse setup anymore. You'll only need it during this initialization. If you choose to, you can come back, install the keyboard and mouse, and control your TrueNAS via command line GUI like this. But it's by no means as graphical. It's just a simple text-based user interface, and it's far more recommended to access your TrueNAS via a web browser or certain client proprietary tools. The first time we're setting up the device, there's a lot of defaults. It will be quicker moving forward, but the first time unpacking of your installed TrueNAS core installation does take a little bit more time than many of us would like to admit. But at the moment, what I'm going to do is fast forward to the initialization of our TrueNAS installation, and when this screen is showing us our startup information. Let's fast forward. And there we go, our TrueNAS core system has now booted up there. We can see there on screen that our IP is 192.168.1.139. So again, you can configure the rest of your TrueNAS here from within your setup if you choose to via HDMI, but personally I recommend that we make our way away from that keyboard and over into the web browser. So what we'll do is we'll switch over to the display capture there. We'll pop me in the corner still. There we are. And from there, we'll open up the web browser. So as mentioned earlier on, I do recommend that you take advantage of advanced IP scanner. It allows you to scan your local area network. And as you can see here, as we are talking, it is scanning my local area network looking for different devices there. And again, depending on our IP, we'll be able to find it there. So if we head back into the app there, we go back into that video capture, we know that our IP is 1.139. So we'll come back, we'll put the display capture back there on the top, and me there in the top corner. So we're back there, so 139. And we can see they're scrolling down that it's starting to find it, and there is our TrueNAS there on IP 139. Again, we can double click if we choose, or we can go ahead and just copy the IP if we choose to. Copy the IP, go into there and pop it up on a new tab, and it will open it up. And there we are, there is our user interface for TrueNAS Core. So what we can do from this point is enter that information that we created earlier. Remember, we're no longer using the HDMI there. We're only using the web browser and our interface, and this will boot us into our TrueNAS Core NAS that we are now running on our TS453E. You can see the Intel Celeron processor, the J4125. It's still not the most powerful CPU for a TrueNAS installation, but it's better to have it. And you can also see, as you saw some notifications earlier on, about network connectivity there. And you can see we're already connected to one network option there, but there were alerts. And as you can see, there's our memory. We're already utilizing a decent chunk of it. But we're going to wrap the video up in just a moment. Remember, if you want to reverse this, head back into the BIOS like we did earlier on and change that boot sequence to the QNAP OS SSD that's inside that little MC SSD. But if you want to create your first area of storage, what you need to do is go down to the storage area here, select Pool, and then from there, select Add at the top. If you want to create a pool, select Create, or if you have an existing TrueNAS Core data set that you want to move over, you can go for it there. But for now, I'm going to click Add Pool. There are a couple of 4 TB drives that I've got connected to the device. So boom, I can select both of those. I can add those to there, and if I like, I can create myself a sweet little mirror there. So again, I can create myself a mirror. Again, I'm not going to move those back. We can go ahead and choose our own level of protection there for our data set. There's lots of configuration options there as well, so I can call this one my mirror. And there you go, we've created the mirror. It will give us a capacity of 4 TB because it's 2 drives together. But again, had we used more drives, we would have had more options. Stripe a RAID 0, combining them, but then you don't get your data failure. And it's all pretty much the same. But that's it. If we go ahead and click Create, we would create our data set. But I'm not going to do that today because I've still got other stuff to do. But this has been how to install TrueNAS Core on a QNAP NAS. Remember, what you are doing here today, one, will delete the data on those disks, so have yourself a backup and it will completely remove the structure of a QNAP's QTS layout of the data on those disks within its own RAID set. You cannot import a RAID from QTS into TrueNAS. It just doesn't work. And also, remember, I'm not entirely clear personally what the effect of doing this is going to be on your warranty and support. So do be aware of that before going down this road. And again, I do recommend QTS. I think it's a great platform with some great user-friendly things that TrueNAS is never really going to be that straightforward to. It has things it can do, and TrueNAS, on the other hand, has its own advantages such as ZFS and more. But this has been, as I say, putting TrueNAS Core on a QNAP NAS. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to learn more. I will be looking at TrueNAS Scale and Unraid very, very soon on these systems. If you've got any other OSs you want me to try out and install, do let me know in the comments. Hopefully, by about now, there is the full written breakdown of how to do this linked in the description below. If not, wait a few days. There will be a written walkthrough of today's video along with Unraid and TrueNAS Scale. And of course, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares and the free advice section in the community area of NAS Compares called Ask NAS Compares, where me, Eddie, and the community all get together to help each other out. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. There's links in the description to all of the tools, software and hardware we've used today. And otherwise, I will see you next time.